Hey friend, welcome to Sleepy History World. Before we begin tonight, if this channel becomes a place you enjoy returning to, where the slow pace and gentle storytelling help make your nights a little calmer, please take a moment to subscribe. It's a simple way to support the channel and helps us continue sharing quiet journeys into the past. Now get comfortable, settle in, and let the day slowly fade away as we travel back to another time. Tonight, imagine waking on a cool autumn morning in the late 19th century, not inside a modest farmhouse or a crowded city apartment, but beneath the carved wooden ceiling of an enormous Gilded Age mansion. Before you have even opened your eyes, the house is already awake. Somewhere below your bedroom, servants have been moving quietly through hidden corridors since before sunrise. Fires are being lit, silver is being polished, horses are being prepared outside, fresh bread is warming in the kitchen, while heavy curtains are slowly opened to reveal gardens stretching beyond enormous windows. You rise from bed knowing that almost every detail of your day has already been arranged by someone else. Your clothes are waiting. Breakfast is being prepared. A carriage can be brought to the door whenever you need it. And tonight, beneath glittering chandeliers, some of the wealthiest and most influential people in America may gather around your dinner table. But behind all that marble, silk, jewellery, servants, and extraordinary luxury was a surprisingly complicated world. There were strict social rules, carefully arranged marriages, family rivalries, enormous expectations, and fortunes that could sometimes disappear almost as quickly as they had been created. So tonight, we're going beyond the grand staircases and glittering ballrooms to discover what everyday life actually felt like for the incredibly wealthy families of America's Gilded Age. Imagine waking on a crisp autumn morning sometime in the late 19th century, not in a modest farmhouse or a crowded city tenement, but beneath a carved mahogany ceiling in one of the enormous mansions built by America's wealthiest families during the Gilded Age. The first thing you notice is that the house is already awake long before you are. Somewhere below your bedroom, servants have been moving quietly through corridors. Since before sunrise, carrying coal, polishing silver, lighting fires, preparing breakfast, opening curtains, sweeping floors, and making certain that when the family finally appears, the complicated machinery of wealthy life seems to operate almost by magic. Your bedroom is larger than many working families' entire homes, with thick carpets softening every footstep and heavy curtains surrounding tall windows that overlook carefully landscaped gardens. The bed itself may be surrounded by carved wood, embroidered fabric, and imported linens, while nearby stands a marble-topped washstand holding a porcelain basin and pitcher. Depending on the house and the decade, indoor plumbing may already provide extraordinary conveniences. But even wealthy homes are living through a period of rapid technological change. Gaslight is giving way to electricity. Telephones are appearing in grand houses. Elevators are being installed in some urban mansions, and elaborate heating systems are slowly making winter more comfortable. For a rich family, possessing the newest technology is not merely convenient. It is another way of demonstrating that they belong to the modern world. Yet the greatest luxury surrounding you is not the furniture, the artwork, or even the enormous house. It is the number of people whose working lives are organized around making your own life comfortable. A large household might employ a butler, housekeeper, cook, kitchen maids, chambermaids, footmen, laundresses, coachmen, gardeners, valets, and personal maids. In the grandest households, the servants form a carefully organized hierarchy, almost as complicated as the social hierarchy outside the mansion. The family may rarely see many of these workers directly. Servants move through back staircases, narrow corridors, basement kitchens, service entrances, and hidden doors, specifically designed to keep the labour of maintaining the house away from the elegant rooms where the family and their guests spend their time. When you rise, you do not necessarily begin by searching for clothes yourself. A wealthy gentleman may have a valet to prepare his clothing, brush his coats, polish his shoes, organize his wardrobe, and help him dress. A wealthy woman might rely on a lady's maid who understands the complicated layers of fashionable clothing and knows exactly which dress, gloves, jewelry, hat, and accessories are appropriate for each part of the day. Clothing among the rich is governed by rules that can seem astonishingly precise. What you wear at breakfast is not necessarily what you wear while receiving visitors, taking a carriage ride, attending dinner, going to the opera, or appearing at a ball. Wealth allows people to own enormous wardrobes, but society also expects them to understand how those wardrobes should be used. Dressing incorrectly can become a small social disaster, because the Gilded Age elite live in a world where appearances communicate status almost constantly. Eventually you leave your bedroom and enter the more public portion of the house. Morning sunlight falls across polished floors, paintings, bronze sculptures, enormous mirrors, carved staircases, and furniture collected from different parts of Europe. Some wealthy Americans deliberately decorate their homes to resemble aristocratic European residences. Renaissance paintings, French furniture, Persian carpets, Chinese porcelain, classical statues, medieval tapestries, and rooms inspired by European palaces might all exist under the same roof. The result can be spectacular and occasionally overwhelming. These houses are not designed simply to provide shelter. They are statements. Every doorway, staircase, dining room, library, ballroom, and drawing room quietly announces that the people living here possess money, connections, education, taste, or at least enough money to purchase the appearance of taste. Breakfast may be served in a smaller dining room rather than the enormous formal dining hall used for evening entertainment. Even this supposedly simple meal can be substantial. Coffee or tea might accompany eggs, breads, fruit, meat, fish, preserves, and other dishes depending on the household. Newspapers arrive carrying reports about politics, business, society, industrial expansion, labor disputes, foreign events, and the increasingly astonishing fortunes being created across the country. For the father of an extremely wealthy household, breakfast may be one of the quieter moments before business begins. His fortune could come from railroads, steel, banking, mining, oil, shipping, manufacturing, real estate, or inherited wealth. The Gilded Age is producing industrial fortunes on a scale that fascinates and alarms the public. A man might leave his mansion in a private carriage and travel toward an office where decisions involving thousands of workers, enormous factories, railroad networks, mines, investments, and millions of dollars are made behind polished wooden doors. Wealth does not necessarily mean leisure for the men building these fortunes. Some are relentless workers who spend long days studying accounts, negotiating deals, sending telegrams, meeting partners, watching markets, purchasing competitors, and searching for the next opportunity. Their homes may resemble palaces, but their businesses can be intensely competitive. Fortunes rise quickly, and financial panics can destroy them with frightening speed. For their wives and daughters, the day's responsibilities are different, but not necessarily empty. Wealthy women are often excluded from the formal business and political power available to men. Yet within elite society they can exercise considerable social influence. Running a grand household requires organization, even when servants perform most physical tasks. The mistress of the house may meet with the housekeeper, discuss menus, approve arrangements for dinners, manage invitations, supervise children's schedules, plan charitable activities, select furnishings, organize travel, and maintain an enormous network of social obligations. She must remember who has called upon her, whose invitation requires an answer, which family is currently fashionable, who has recently married, who is mourning, who has offended whom, and which social relationships should be encouraged or quietly avoided. In this world, a dinner invitation can carry meaning far beyond the meal itself. Being invited into the right drawing room may signal acceptance into a particular social circle, while being repeatedly excluded can be humiliating. Old established families sometimes look suspiciously upon newly wealthy industrial families, regardless of how enormous their fortunes become. Money can purchase a mansion, servants, horses, paintings, diamonds, and fashionable clothing. But social acceptance is harder to buy. This tension between old money and new money becomes one of the defining features of elite Gilded Age society. Families with recently acquired fortunes may spend extraordinary amounts attempting to establish themselves. They hire famous architects, commission enormous houses, purchase European art, host elaborate parties, and arrange marriages that connect their names to older American families, or even European aristocracy. A mother with daughters approaching marriageable age may think carefully about their social future. Marriage among the wealthy certainly involves romance in some cases, but family background, fortune, reputation, religion, and social connections can matter enormously. American heiresses sometimes marry European noblemen whose ancient titles carry prestige, but whose estates desperately need money. The exchange is obvious even when nobody says it aloud. American wealth enters an old aristocratic family, while the American bride gains a title and access to a world her parents could never have inherited. For children growing up inside these mansions, life can feel simultaneously privileged and surprisingly controlled. Nurseries are often located away from the main entertaining rooms, and young children may spend much of their time with nurses, governesses, tutors, and other household employees. Their parents love them, but wealthy Victorian ideas about childhood can produce a degree of formality that feels unfamiliar today. Children may be brought downstairs at particular times to greet their parents before returning to the nursery. As they grow older, their education becomes increasingly important. Sons of wealthy families might attend elite boarding schools before continuing to prestigious universities, where friendships formed with other privileged young men can later become valuable business and political connections. Daughters may receive private instruction in languages, literature, music, drawing, dancing, etiquette, and other accomplishments considered appropriate for women of their social position. A young woman is expected to know how to move through formal society with confidence. She learns how to receive callers, conduct conversation, dress appropriately, dance, write invitations, and avoid behavior that might damage her reputation. Reputation matters enormously because wealthy families live under constant observation from their own social circle and increasingly from newspapers fascinated by high society. By late morning, a wealthy woman might prepare to make social calls. This seemingly simple activity follows an elaborate system. Calling cards are carried and left at houses, signaling visits and maintaining relationships. As morning returns to the mansion, the enormous house slowly reveals something that would have been easy to miss during the glittering evening before. Wealthy Gilded Age life depends on an astonishing amount of preparation. Long before the family hears the first carriage outside or smells coffee drifting toward the breakfast room, activity has begun below stairs. In the kitchen, the cook works beside assistants preparing bread, meat, eggs, preserves, fruit, and whatever else the household expects that morning. Fires have to be encouraged back to life, water heated, deliveries received, and ingredients inspected. Somewhere else in the house, a maid moves through a bedroom carrying fresh water and linens, careful not to make unnecessary noise. Another servant opens curtains in a sitting room and checks the fireplace. A footman polishes metal fittings that already appear perfectly clean. The standards of a great household allow little room for visible disorder. Dust on a table, fingerprints on silver, a badly folded napkin, or a fire allowed to die at the wrong moment might seem insignificant to the family, but to the servants responsible for these things, such mistakes could bring criticism from the housekeeper or butler. The family therefore experiences the mansion almost as if it maintains itself. Doors open, meals arrive, clothes appear freshly pressed, lamps are ready, fires burn, horses wait outside, and rooms somehow return to perfect order after hundreds of guests have passed through them. The secret is simply that someone is always working beyond the family's immediate view. This separation between comfort and labour is built directly into the architecture. Walk through a grand mansion as a guest, and you encounter beautiful corridors, sweeping staircases, decorated ceilings, enormous windows, and carefully arranged rooms. Follow a servant carrying a tray, however, and you enter another building hidden inside the first. Narrow stairways connect floors without crossing formal spaces. Service corridors allow food and supplies to move invisibly. Basement rooms contain kitchens, pantries, storage areas, coal, wine, and equipment. Servants may sleep in small bedrooms far removed from the luxurious chambers occupied by the family. Bells and speaking tubes connect these worlds. A wealthy person can pull a cord or press a button and summon assistance without seeing the complicated network of labor that answers the request. For children born into this environment, such arrangements can appear completely normal. Imagine being 6 years old and never remembering a morning when breakfast had not been prepared for you. Your clothing is washed by someone else, your room cleaned by someone else, your lessons organized by adults employed specifically to educate or supervise you, and your family's carriage prepared whenever transportation is required. You may understand that servants work in the house, but the true scale of their labor remains largely invisible. Your nursery becomes a small kingdom separated from adult society. Toys, books, dolls, rocking horses, miniature soldiers, puzzles, and beautifully illustrated children's stories fill shelves and cupboards. Wealthy parents can purchase objects unavailable to most children, yet childhood may also contain strict discipline. A nurse decides when younger children eat, sleep, exercise, and appear before their parents. Later, a governess or tutor introduces increasingly demanding lessons. Children are expected to develop self-control because eventually they must represent the family publicly. A badly behaved child is not simply embarrassing. Poor behavior can be interpreted as evidence of poor upbringing. Sons and daughters gradually become aware that their surname carries expectations. The sons of particularly prominent families may hear business discussed around them from childhood. They know that one day they could inherit investments, property, companies, or responsibilities involving thousands of employees. Their fathers may encourage toughness, discipline, and ambition, worried that children raised in luxury will become weak or irresponsible. This fear appears repeatedly among wealthy families. The generation that built the fortune often remembers uncertainty, competition, or intense work, while the next generation grows up surrounded by servants and abundance. Parents wonder whether children who have never needed to earn anything will understand the effort required to preserve what they inherit. Some wealthy fathers deliberately restrict allowances or demand serious education. Others provide their children with extraordinary amounts of money, producing young men who become famous for horses, clubs, gambling, travel, parties, expensive clothing, and spectacular spending. Society watches these heirs carefully. A young man from an important family can become the subject of newspaper gossip simply by spending too much time with the wrong companions. For daughters, scrutiny can be even more intense. As a wealthy girl approaches adulthood, her introduction into society becomes a major family event. Dresses are ordered, portraits may be commissioned, guest lists prepared, and suitable social connections cultivated. Entering society means becoming visible as a young woman eligible for marriage, and suddenly almost every public appearance acquires significance. At a ball she may dance with several men, but everyone notices who receives the most dances. A gentleman who repeatedly visits the family home attracts attention. A carriage ride can produce rumours. Mothers observe one another. Young women exchange gossip, and newspapers sometimes transform private courtship into public entertainment. Beneath the romantic surface lies an economic reality that nobody needs to explain openly. Marriage can strengthen or weaken a family's position. A respectable name with limited money may find a partnership with new industrial wealth extremely attractive. A newly wealthy family may value the prestige attached to an older surname. The bride herself may possess a substantial inheritance, although laws and financial arrangements governing married women's property are changing during the period. Lawyers can become essential figures in wealthy marriages because enormous amounts of property may be involved. Prenuptial settlements, trusts, inheritances, and family agreements ensure that romance exists beside paperwork. Even after marriage, the expectations continue. A wealthy wife is expected to manage the social identity of her household. Her husband's business success may provide the fortune, but she can determine whether that fortune translates into social influence. She chooses whom to invite, which invitations to accept, where the family spends the season, which charities receive attention, and how the household presents itself. Some women become extraordinarily skilled at this. They understand society almost like experienced politicians understand elections. They know alliances, rivalries, histories, ambitions, and vulnerabilities. A successful dinner might bring together a banker, politician, industrialist, writer, foreign diplomat, and socially prominent family in a single room. Conversations that appear casual can create relationships with real consequences. The drawing room therefore becomes a place where social power operates quietly. Afternoon tea might look relaxed, but the people invited matter. Even the order in which someone is received can communicate status. Calling cards become part of this elaborate language. A small piece of engraved paper left at a door announces that someone has visited and expects the gesture to be recognized. Families maintain lists of acquaintances and obligations because failing to return a social call can be interpreted as deliberate disrespect. The amount of time spent maintaining these relationships is enormous. A woman may spend hours traveling from house to house in a carriage, leaving cards, making short visits, discussing engagements, weddings, illnesses, dinners, charitable events, and the endless movement of fashionable society. She may return home exhausted, despite having performed almost no physical labor in the ordinary sense. The exhaustion comes from maintaining constant composure. Wealthy society expects emotional discipline. You smile at someone you dislike because openly insulting them would create unnecessary scandal. You attend a dinner because declining would offend an important family. You congratulate a rival on her daughter's engagement. You listen politely to a guest whose opinions irritate you. Every gesture becomes part of the performance. The house itself must perform too. Consider what happens when an important visitor is expected. The best rooms are inspected. Fresh flowers arrive. The kitchen receives instructions. Silver is polished again. The family's finest carriage may be sent to collect someone from a railway station. Guest bedrooms are prepared with clean linen, towels, water, writing materials, and perhaps flowers. A guest staying several days becomes almost a temporary member of the household. Although the servants absorb most of the additional work, breakfast preferences are remembered, luggage carried, clothes brushed, fires maintained, baths prepared, and transportation arranged. Wealth allows hospitality to reach an extraordinary scale. A country estate might receive dozens of guests for a weekend of riding, shooting, dinners, music, and conversation. Arriving at such an estate feels like entering a private world. Beyond the main gates, a long drive winds through landscaped grounds deliberately designed to create anticipation. Trees frame carefully chosen views. Gardens appear natural, while actually requiring teams of gardeners. The mansion finally emerges beyond lawns and fountains, large enough to resemble a hotel or government building. Yet this is only one family's seasonal residence. Perhaps the strangest thing about spending enough time inside a wealthy Gilded Age household would be discovering how carefully every hour could be divided between public life and private life, because the enormous mansion that appeared so open during a ball could become remarkably secluded once the doors closed behind the final guest. Morning belonged partly to family routine, afternoon to social obligations, and evening frequently to entertainment. But there were also quiet stretches when the inhabitants retreated into rooms designed specifically for personal comfort. A wealthy gentleman might disappear into his library after breakfast, closing the heavy wooden doors behind him, while servants understood that he should not be disturbed unnecessarily. The library could be one of the most atmospheric rooms in the entire house, lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound books, maps, newspapers, business reports, and perhaps objects collected during foreign travels. A fire burned behind an ornate grate during cold weather. Deep chairs stood beneath reading lamps, and the smell of polished wood mixed with tobacco smoke. Here the owner of the house might read correspondence from business partners, examine investment reports, dictate letters to a secretary, or simply escape the constant performance expected in formal rooms. His desk might contain telegrams arriving from distant cities, where factories, mines, railroads, or financial interests connected him to people he would never personally meet. A single message could report an opportunity capable of increasing the family fortune, while another could announce a strike, failed investment, accident, lawsuit, or unexpected market decline. The calm surroundings, therefore, did not always produce a calm mind. Some of the richest men of the age lived under enormous pressure, because maintaining a fortune could require the same relentless attention that had created it. Their families might see the mansion as proof that financial security had been achieved, while the man responsible for that fortune knew how quickly markets could turn against him. He might sit surrounded by paintings worth astonishing sums and still worry about tomorrow morning's prices. His wife inhabited a different sphere of responsibility. Her private sitting room could contain writing desks, photographs, flowers, books, embroidery, comfortable furniture, and personal objects absent from the more theatrical spaces downstairs. Here she could answer letters without constantly maintaining the formal posture required before guests. Correspondence consumed surprising amounts of time. Invitations needed responses. Relatives living elsewhere expected news. Friends traveling in Europe sent long descriptions of their journeys. Charitable organizations requested money or attendance. Dressmakers confirmed appointments. Schools wrote about children. Household suppliers sent accounts. A woman responsible for a prominent family could receive a stream of paper connecting her to an enormous network of people. The absence of electronic communication did not necessarily make life simple. It merely meant that much of social life travelled through envelopes. Letters were treasured, reread, stored, and sometimes destroyed deliberately, because everyone understood that private words could become dangerous if they reached the wrong hands. Privacy mattered intensely in a society fascinated by gossip. Newspapers increasingly recognized that readers enjoyed stories about millionaires, almost as much as millionaires enjoyed complaining about newspaper attention. A family wedding, engagement, divorce, inheritance dispute, extravagant purchase, European journey, or spectacular party could become public information. Reporters might describe gowns, jewels, decorations, guest lists, and rumours. With extraordinary enthusiasm, wealth created celebrity long before modern celebrity culture acquired its familiar form. The richest families became characters in a national story about success, excess, ambition, and inequality. People who would never enter their houses could nevertheless know which family had purchased a famous painting, or which heiress was expected to marry a European nobleman. Inside the mansion, protecting the family name therefore became almost a daily responsibility. A careless son who accumulated gambling debts could embarrass generations. A daughter's romantic attachment to someone considered unsuitable could become a family crisis. A husband's affair might remain quietly tolerated until publicity made silence impossible. Even servants could become sources of anxiety, because they witnessed private behaviour that guests never saw. The ideal servant was expected to be discreet, and discretion could be as valuable as competence. A personal maid knew what her mistress looked like before cosmetics, jewellery, and elaborate clothing transformed her for society. A valet might know about his employer's drinking habits, debts, illnesses, private letters, and late-night movements. The cook knew which supposedly elegant dinner had nearly become a disaster in the kitchen. The butler knew which guests were secretly unwelcome. Servants saw the family without the protective surface displayed to society. And yet they were expected to behave as though they had seen nothing at all. This produced a peculiar intimacy without equality. A servant could spend decades inside one household, watch children grow into adults, witness marriages and deaths, travel with the family, and know their habits better than distant relatives did, while still remaining socially separated from them. Some employers developed genuine affection for long-serving staff. Others treated servants with cold formality or unreasonable demands. Relationships varied enormously from household to household, but hierarchy remained unmistakable. Even among servants, rank mattered. The butler and housekeeper generally occupied positions of authority. Upper servants might eat separately from junior workers. A new kitchen maid could find herself near the bottom of a complicated social structure with rules she had to learn quickly. Servants had their own gossip, friendships, conflicts, romances, ambitions, and private opinions about the family upstairs. Behind the polished silence expected in formal rooms existed another community almost invisible to guests. Mealtimes exposed the difference particularly clearly. Consider the preparation required for a major dinner. The mistress of the house and cook might discuss the menu well beforehand, considering the number of guests, available ingredients, season, dietary expectations, and desired level of extravagance. Supplies arrive through service entrances rather than the grand front door. Fish must be fresh, meat properly prepared, vegetables cleaned, sauces produced, desserts constructed, wines selected, table linens inspected, silver counted, china arranged, and serving order rehearsed. In the dining room, the table itself becomes a piece of theatre. Flowers, candles, decorative objects, place cards, polished cutlery, crystal glasses, and fine porcelain create a scene intended to look effortless. Yet below stairs, the kitchen is anything but effortless. Heat from ovens and ranges fills the room. Pots move constantly. Instructions pass between workers. Timing becomes critical, because a dish reaching the dining room too early or too late can disrupt the entire sequence. A meal lasting several hours above stairs may require most of the day to prepare below. The guests experience conversation and flavour. The workers experience heat, weight, speed, and exhaustion. Afterward, when guests move into another room, mountains of dishes remain. The servant's day continues long after the family considers dinner finished. Ordinary family meals could be less elaborate, but wealthy households still enjoyed extraordinary access to food. Improvements in transportation meant that ingredients could travel farther and faster than before. Railways and refrigerated shipping expanded possibilities. Urban markets offered meat, fish, fruit, vegetables, spices, coffee, tea, and imported delicacies. Greenhouses on private estates could produce flowers and certain foods outside their normal seasons. The wealthy could enjoy abundance during a period when poorer families might spend a substantial portion of their income simply obtaining enough basic food. Yet fashionable eating carried its own rules. People worried about digestion, appropriate portions, health, and manners. Dining etiquette could intimidate anyone unfamiliar with elite society. Multiple forks, knives, spoons, glasses, and dishes appeared around a single place setting. Knowing which utensil to use became another quiet marker of upbringing. A newcomer might possess millions and still reveal unfamiliarity with elite customs by reaching for the wrong fork. Such tiny mistakes mattered because established society frequently used manners as a barrier against people who had recently acquired wealth. Money could be earned quickly. Effortless familiarity with complicated etiquette supposedly proved that someone had been raised correctly. This distinction obsessed many newly rich parents. Their children therefore received lessons not merely in academic subjects, but in behavior. A young man needed to understand formal introductions, correspondence, dancing, dining, appropriate conversation, and how to treat women according to contemporary expectations. A young woman learned an even more elaborate collection of rules governing dress, visits, courtship, public behavior, and reputation. She might have access to extraordinary material comfort, while possessing surprisingly limited freedom to move independently. Walking alone in certain situations could attract criticism. Traveling without an appropriate companion could create gossip. Receiving a gentleman privately might be considered improper. And yet, to truly understand what life felt like inside a rich Gilded Age family, you would need to experience not merely the magnificent evenings that appeared in newspapers, but one of those seemingly ordinary days when nothing historically important happened at all. Because it was during ordinary days that wealth revealed its most remarkable power. Imagine waking again sometime around the 1890s, perhaps in a mansion overlooking one of the fashionable avenues of New York, when the winter sky beyond your curtains is still pale, and the city below is beginning another noisy morning. Your bedroom is warm despite the cold outside. That alone represents considerable comfort in an age when countless families wake beside frozen windows and hurry to revive dying fires. Somewhere beneath you, coal has already been carried, furnaces attended, and fireplaces prepared. You do not see any of this. You simply wake in warmth. Heavy curtains keep the room dark until someone opens them. A pitcher of fresh water is ready. Clean towels have appeared. Yesterday's clothing has disappeared for brushing or laundering, and the clothes appropriate for this morning have been arranged. Perhaps you ring for your personal servant, although in a well-run household, the servant already knows roughly when you rise. There is something almost strange about having another person understand your daily habits so thoroughly. Your valet knows which collar you prefer, which boots feel uncomfortable, which coat you wear when rain threatens, and which cufflinks you choose for formal dinners. A lady's maid possesses similarly intimate knowledge of her mistress's wardrobe and appearance. She knows which gowns require repairs, which jewels accompany which dresses, how a complicated hairstyle should be arranged, and perhaps which outfit her employer secretly dislikes. Despite continuing to wear it because society admires it, dressing can take considerable time, particularly for women whose fashionable clothing may involve several carefully arranged layers. Corsets remain common, silhouettes change according to fashion, and sleeves, skirts, bodices, hats, gloves, jewellery, and shoes all contribute to the finished appearance. A wealthy woman can change clothing several times during a single day. There may be one style suitable for morning, another for afternoon calls, another for outdoor activity, and something dramatically more formal for dinner. Clothing therefore becomes almost a schedule worn on the body. The moment you see someone, you can often tell what kind of activity they expect to perform. Once dressed, you descend through a house whose scale still seems astonishing, even after years of living there. The staircase may be broad enough for several people to walk beside one another. Portraits hang along the walls. Sunlight catches brass fittings and polished wooden surfaces. Somewhere nearby, you hear a servant briefly, and then nothing. The best servants are trained to move quietly, and the architecture assists them. You enter the breakfast room rather than the formal dining room, because using an enormous ceremonial room for every meal would be unnecessarily stiff even by elite standards. Breakfast can be relatively informal within the family. Newspapers are unfolded. Letters wait beside plates. Coffee arrives. Depending on the household, people may enter at slightly different times, rather than assembling with the precision expected at dinner. This is one of the rare moments when the family can appear almost ordinary. A daughter complains about an upcoming lesson. A son talks about horses. Someone discusses the weather. A parent reads a newspaper without listening. Another opens a letter from a relative travelling abroad. Yet even this quiet breakfast is surrounded by privilege. The fruit on the table may have travelled hundreds or thousands of miles. The china is expensive. The coffee has crossed an ocean. The silver has been polished by someone who rose hours earlier. When a plate is finished, it disappears. Nobody in the family wonders who will wash it. After breakfast, the household divides. The father may leave for business. His departure is itself carefully supported. His coat and hat are ready. A carriage waits outside, or increasingly, as the century turns, perhaps a motor car. The driver knows the destination. The businessman steps from one controlled environment into another, travelling through streets filled with people whose lives are far less predictable. From behind the carriage window he sees shops opening, delivery wagons blocking intersections, labourers moving toward factories, streetcars carrying workers, newsboys shouting headlines, and immigrants navigating a city that may still feel bewilderingly new. The physical distance between mansion and office might be only a few miles. Yet socially he passes through several different Americas during the journey. At the office, the atmosphere changes immediately. The luxurious domestic world gives way to figures, contracts, telegrams, maps, lawyers, managers, secretaries, bankers, and competitors. The wealthy businessman may control an enterprise larger than many towns. Decisions made during a morning meeting can determine whether a factory expands, a railroad line is constructed, a mine remains open, or thousands of employees continue working. Industrial wealth creates an extraordinary concentration of decision-making power. A handful of men can influence entire regions without ever visiting the communities affected by their choices. They may think in terms of production, transportation, investment, and efficiency, while workers experience those same decisions as wages, hours, injuries, layoffs, and food on the family table. The businessman does not necessarily see himself as cruel. Many believe intensely in discipline, competition, progress, and the idea that successful men deserve the fortunes they create. Some are deeply religious. Some give enormous amounts to charity. Some genuinely believe industrial expansion improves life for everyone in the long run. Others are simply interested in winning. Most are more complicated than the heroic or villainous images later attached to them. What they share is a world where opportunity seems almost limitless to those possessing capital and connections. Back at the mansion, the women of the family begin another kind of work. The mistress of the household may meet briefly with the housekeeper. This meeting reveals just how much administration hides behind domestic elegance. Repairs are required somewhere. A servant has requested time away. Supplies must be ordered. Guests are arriving later in the week. One bedroom needs preparing. The cook wants approval for a dinner menu. Flowers have been requested for tomorrow evening. A piece of furniture requires attention. Laundry schedules need adjusting. The mistress does not scrub floors or carry coal herself, but overseeing a residence containing dozens of rooms and perhaps dozens of employees still demands decisions. In the grandest homes, household expenses can resemble the operating budget of a small business. Food, wages, fuel, horses, maintenance, flowers, clothing, entertainment, travel, wine repairs, and countless other costs continue, whether the family thinks about them or not. Wealth makes these expenses manageable, but somebody still keeps accounts. The housekeeper may maintain detailed records, while the mistress reviews larger matters. Then the formal social day begins. A wealthy woman planning to make calls changes into appropriate clothing and leaves in a carriage. Her gloves are immaculate. Her hat has been carefully selected. Calling cards are carried in a case. The carriage moves through fashionable streets where other carriages are performing exactly the same ritual. At one house she remains only briefly. At another she learns that a friend's daughter has become engaged. Somewhere else she encounters a woman whose invitation she recently declined and must politely explain why. The conversation remains pleasant, but beneath it lies constant interpretation. Who is invited where? Who has returned from Europe? Which family is planning a ball? Who has purchased a new house? Which young man seems interested in which young woman who has suffered financial difficulties, but is trying desperately to conceal them? Gossip functions almost like a social newspaper, transmitted from drawing room to drawing room. Information moves rapidly because elite society is smaller than it appears. The same families repeatedly meet at dinners, clubs, resorts, churches, weddings, theatres, and charitable events. Everyone is connected through someone else. This makes reputation extraordinarily difficult to repair once damaged. A single scandal can travel across the entire network within days. Children, meanwhile, inhabit their own structured world. A tutor may arrive for a teenage son, carrying books in mathematics, history, classical languages, or literature. A daughter studies French or music. Younger children practice handwriting or geography beneath the watchful eye of a governess. Education is considered essential not simply for knowledge, but for producing the kind of person expected to move comfortably among the elite. Languages are especially valuable because wealthy families travel internationally. Music demonstrates cultivation. Knowledge of European history and art allows someone to participate confidently in conversation. Boys may also receive training in riding, rowing, boxing, shooting, or other sports associated with physical discipline. Parents worry that urban luxury will produce weak sons, so vigorous exercise becomes almost a moral project. Girls may ride and play certain sports too, although expectations surrounding femininity influence what is considered appropriate. As the children grow older, schools increasingly replace home instruction. There were also mornings when the mansion did not wake beneath the pressure of business meetings or an approaching dinner party. Mornings when rain struck the tall windows and the family remained indoors while the city outside disappeared beneath a grey curtain. On such days, the enormous scale of the house became more noticeable, without guests moving through the entrance hall or carriages arriving outside. Entire sections could remain almost completely silent. A person might walk from a bedroom through a corridor, descend a staircase, cross a gallery filled with paintings, and enter a library without encountering another member of the family. In a smaller home, family life naturally forced people together. In a mansion containing dozens of rooms, solitude could be achieved simply by closing a door. A father might spend hours in his study while his wife occupied a sitting room on another floor. Their children studied elsewhere, and servants moved quietly through passages connecting all of them. They were living beneath one roof, but could inhabit almost separate worlds. This was one of the less obvious consequences of enormous wealth. Space created comfort, but it also created distance. Family members did not necessarily gather around a single fire because there were fireplaces everywhere. They did not need to share one sitting room because each person could have a favorite room. A wealthy teenager annoyed with his parents could disappear into the library, billiard room, stable, garden, or private bedroom rather than remain in the center of household activity. A daughter wanting privacy could retreat into a small sitting room and write letters without being disturbed. A mother could spend an afternoon organizing charitable work while barely seeing her husband until dinner. The mansion allowed people to avoid one another politely, which could preserve peace, but also allow disagreements to remain unresolved for years. The servants learned these family patterns better than almost anyone. They knew which husband and wife rarely breakfasted together, which child was frightened of a strict father, which daughter secretly waited for letters from a particular gentleman, and which elderly relative needed extra attention climbing the stairs. They knew which family member slept late, who demanded perfectly hot water, who frequently misplaced jewelry, and who quietly entered the kitchen looking for food after midnight. The official household operated according to rules, but the real household was built from hundreds of habits. An experienced servant learned them all. Perhaps the master disliked being spoken to before coffee. Perhaps his wife wanted flowers replaced every morning, even when yesterday's arrangements still looked fresh. Perhaps one child hated porridge and attempted to feed it to the dog whenever the nurse turned away. These tiny details made the mansion less like the flawless palace imagined by outsiders and more like an ordinary family home, enlarged to extraordinary proportions. There were arguments over breakfast, forgotten appointments, children refusing lessons, husbands returning late, wives becoming irritated, relatives overstaying their welcome, dogs muddying carpets, servants resigning unexpectedly, pipes leaking, fireplaces smoking, and elaborate meals occasionally going wrong. Wealth did not eliminate inconvenience completely. It simply provided enough people and money to repair inconvenience quickly. A broken window was replaced. A ruined carpet could be cleaned or purchased again. A malfunctioning furnace brought specialists to the house. A cancelled train might result in private transportation being arranged. The difference was not that problems never happened, but that most practical problems rarely became disasters. Money provided alternatives. That security shaped the personalities of people raised within it. A child who knew that mistakes could usually be corrected might develop remarkable confidence. He could travel, experiment, invest, pursue hobbies, or change careers without fearing immediate poverty. Failure was uncomfortable rather than catastrophic. A young man could attempt business with family capital behind him. A daughter interested in painting could study privately with respected teachers. Someone fascinated by archaeology might travel abroad. Another interested in science could build a private laboratory or support research. Wealth purchased time, and time could be used for extraordinary things. Some heirs used that freedom brilliantly, becoming collectors, philanthropists, reformers, writers, patrons, explorers, or scholars. Others drifted through adulthood, searching for something capable of producing genuine excitement. When almost every ordinary desire could be satisfied quickly, novelty became valuable. This helped explain the wealthy fascination with collecting. One family collected paintings, another manuscripts, another armor, another porcelain, another rare books. Dealers traveled across Europe, searching for objects their clients might purchase. An ancient tapestry or Renaissance painting could cross the Atlantic because an American millionaire wanted it above his staircase. Collecting became partly intellectual and partly competitive. Possessing something rare meant possessing something another millionaire could not simply order from a catalogue. Guests were shown collections almost as carefully as they were shown gardens. A host might casually mention that a particular painting had once belonged to a European noble family, while everyone in the room understood that the casual remark was not entirely casual. Libraries could become collections in the same way. Thousands of beautifully bound books lined walls, sometimes read extensively and sometimes valued largely for their rarity. A wealthy collector might purchase manuscripts, first editions, historical documents, or entire private libraries. Such collecting eventually helped create major museums and research institutions when families donated their holdings to the public. Yet during the owner's lifetime, these objects remained deeply personal symbols of taste and achievement. The mansion itself was perhaps the greatest collection of all. Every room could represent a different aesthetic idea. You might leave a dark English-style library and enter a pale French drawing room decorated with delicate furniture and enormous mirrors. Beyond it might stand an Italian-inspired gallery filled with paintings. Another room could contain Asian ceramics and carved screens. A smoking room might be decorated in a deliberately masculine style, while a ballroom attempted to imitate European court architecture. Modern eyes might find the combination excessive, but excess was partly the point. The house demonstrated that geography and history could be gathered together through purchasing power. A millionaire who had spent his youth in a modest home could now eat breakfast beneath a ceiling inspired by a European palace. That transformation carried emotional significance. Many first-generation fortunes belonged to people who remembered lives very different from those of their children. A father might remember wearing repaired clothing while his daughter possessed dozens of gowns. He might remember travelling in uncomfortable coaches while his family now occupied private railway cars. He might remember counting every household expense while his wife ordered flowers for a single evening at a cost that once would have supported his family for months. Such contrasts could produce pride, but they could also produce tension. The person who earned the fortune might value thrift long after thrift ceased to be financially necessary. Children raised inside wealth could find these habits ridiculous. A father capable of purchasing an entire building might become furious because someone wasted food at breakfast. His children might laugh at his concern, not understanding that scarcity remained part of his memory. These generational differences were common in rapidly rising families. The founder saw money as something difficult to obtain and easy to lose. The heir saw it as the natural background of existence. One generation built, the next inherited. The question of what happened after that worried families constantly. Parents attempted to teach responsibility through allowances, education, and expectations. Sons might be sent into the family business at relatively junior levels, so they would learn operations rather than simply receive impressive titles. Whether they truly experienced ordinary employment was another question. Everyone around them knew whose sons they were. A manager could hardly treat the future owner like any other young employee. Nevertheless, fathers often insisted that heirs understand the source of their wealth. A railroad fortune required knowing something about transportation. A banking fortune demanded financial education. A manufacturing family wanted sons who understood factories and markets. Daughters might not be expected to enter these businesses directly, but their marriages and inheritances could still affect control of family wealth. Trusts became useful tools for preventing fortunes from fragmenting too quickly. Lawyers and bankers therefore became almost extensions of wealthy families. They knew details about assets that even some relatives did not fully understand. Family meetings could involve investments, property, inheritance arrangements, and charitable plans. Behind the romantic image of mansions and balls stood mountains of documents. Wealth on this scale was not a pile of cash stored in a vault. It existed in shares, bonds, land, businesses, mines, railroads, factories, houses, art, trusts, and investments, whose values changed constantly. A family could appear unimaginably rich while possessing surprisingly little immediately available cash. This mattered when expenses became enormous. There was another side to life among the richest Gilded Age families that became visible only when you followed them beyond their mansions and into the wider social world they occupied. Because wealth during this period was not simply something a family possessed behind closed doors. It shaped almost every journey they made, every person they met, every place they entered, and even the way strangers reacted when their surname was announced. Imagine stepping through the front doors of the mansion on a bright afternoon and finding a carriage waiting beneath the entrance canopy. The horses have already been groomed, harnessed, and brought around by stable workers who understood the day's schedule long before the family appeared. The carriage itself is spotless. Brass fittings shine, leather has been maintained, wheels inspected, and the coachman sits above, in carefully chosen clothing that makes him part employee and part visible symbol of the household. A wealthy woman descends the steps accompanied perhaps by a daughter or friend, while a footman assists them into the carriage. Within moments they are moving through the city. From inside, the streets provide a constantly changing view of the extraordinary society created by industrial expansion. Elegant shops occupy fashionable avenues, but only a short distance away factories release smoke into the sky. Streetcars rattle along crowded roads. Horses pull wagons loaded with goods. Workers hurry between buildings. Children sell newspapers, immigrants speak languages brought from across Europe and elsewhere. Construction seems to occur everywhere because cities are growing with astonishing speed. The wealthy passengers observe all of this from a cushioned seat. They are physically present in the same city but protected from many of its difficulties. Rain means closing the carriage window. Mud means someone else cleans the wheels. Distance means changing horses or using the railway. Crowds are something to pass through rather than something one must necessarily join. When the carriage stops outside an exclusive shop, employees may recognize the family immediately. The relationship between wealthy customers and luxury merchants can be intensely personal. Dressmakers remember measurements and preferences. Jewelers understand anniversaries, birthdays, and upcoming weddings. Furniture dealers know which house is being redecorated. Art dealers send information about paintings recently available in Europe. Booksellers search for rare volumes. Florists understand which flowers a hostess prefers for particular rooms. Shopping at this level is not simply choosing objects from shelves. Entire networks of specialists search for things on behalf of clients. A wealthy customer may request something that does not currently exist in the shop, confident that someone will locate or create it. Customization is expected. A gown is fitted precisely to one body. Furniture may be commissioned for one room. Jewelry can be designed around particular stones. A dining service might carry a family monogram. Even luggage can announce ownership through initials and crests. Objects become extensions of identity. Yet fashionable consumption also creates an exhausting race because luxury loses some of its social power once everyone within the same circle possesses it. If several families own magnificent carriages, a more impressive carriage attracts attention. If every ballroom contains flowers, one hostess fills hers with extraordinary quantities of them. If one mansion installs electricity, another installs a more elaborate system. Wealth constantly creates new standards for wealth. The richest families are not comparing themselves with ordinary households, they are comparing themselves with one another. This can make abundance feel strangely insufficient. A house that would astonish almost anyone in the country might seem modest beside the newest mansion erected a few blocks away. A woman owning dozens of gowns may still feel that she has nothing appropriate for an important event, because society has already seen the others. A man possessing several excellent horses may suddenly desire a celebrated racing animal because another gentleman has acquired one. Consumption becomes competition, conducted politely. The newspaper society columns intensify this rivalry by turning private expenditure into public information. Reporters describe houses, parties, weddings, jewelry, clothing, yachts, and journeys. A hostess might pretend not to care what the papers say while secretly reading every line. A favorable description confirms that the event succeeded. A missing name or sarcastic remark can cause irritation for days. Families therefore cultivate relationships not only with one another, but with the public image surrounding them. Some avoid journalists whenever possible. Others understand that publicity can strengthen social standing. The most prominent individuals become recognizable figures, even to people who have never seen them in person. Their lives acquire a strange double existence. One version unfolding privately among relatives and servants, another created publicly through newspapers, rumors, photographs, and gossip. Photography itself changes how wealthy families present themselves. Earlier generations relied primarily on painted portraits, expensive objects requiring long sittings and skilled artists. Now photographs can record children, houses, weddings, journeys, horses, gardens, and family gatherings with increasing ease. Albums accumulate inside drawing rooms and libraries. A visitor might spend an afternoon examining photographs from a European tour, while hearing stories about hotels, mountains, cathedrals, and famous acquaintances. Photographs make memory more tangible. Children can look at grandparents as young people. A mother can preserve the image of a child who later dies. A family can document a mansion at its most magnificent, even if the building eventually disappears. Yet photographs are carefully staged too. People dress properly, arrange themselves deliberately, and attempt to appear composed. The resulting image rarely shows the argument that happened 10 minutes earlier, or the servant waiting outside the frame. Just like the mansion itself, photography presents a polished surface. Public appearances demand similar control. A wealthy family attending the opera does not simply purchase tickets and arrive. The evening begins hours earlier with bathing, dressing, hairstyling, jewellery, and transportation. Opera boxes can become social stages almost as important as the performance below. People observe one another across the theatre. Who sits in which box matters. Who visits another family's box during an interval matters. A new gown receives attention. A spectacular necklace becomes a subject of discussion. Young people exchange glances while older relatives observe them. Some members of the audience may spend almost as much time watching society as watching the singers. The opera therefore functions simultaneously as art and social theatre. Similar dynamics appear at horse races, private clubs, charity events, exhibitions, and fashionable restaurants. Wealthy people repeatedly encounter the same circle in different settings, strengthening the feeling that they inhabit a small nation inside the larger country. Membership is unofficial but carefully guarded. Entry depends on family, money, reputation, education, marriage, and connections. A person with sufficient wealth can challenge these boundaries, but acceptance is rarely immediate. This creates one of the era's most fascinating social struggles. The conflict between families whose status comes from generations of respectability and families whose money is so new that older elites regard it almost as an intrusion. The newly wealthy respond by building houses too magnificent to ignore. They employ celebrated architects and decorators. They purchase European art. They entertain lavishly. They send children to the same schools attended by established families. They join charities, churches, and clubs where connections can develop naturally. Eventually, marriage does what money alone sometimes cannot. A son from one family marries a daughter from another, and yesterday's outsider becomes tomorrow's relative. Within a generation, new money begins acquiring the appearance of old money. Children born inside the completed mansion do not remember the years when their parents were excluded. To them, membership seems inherited. Their parents may remember every insult. Such memories can drive extraordinary ambition. A mother who once discovered that her family was not invited to an important ball might spend years creating a social position so powerful that nobody could exclude her again. Her parties grow larger, her guest lists more influential, and her daughter's marriage becomes almost a strategic campaign. Behind the flowers and music can lie surprisingly fierce determination. Yet there are also days when these rivalries feel far away. Consider a family travelling to its summer home beside the sea. The city disappears behind them, and the atmosphere begins changing before they even arrive. Heavy formal routines loosen slightly. Children become excited as familiar landscapes appear through railway windows. Servants have travelled ahead or are waiting at the destination. When the family finally reaches the property, windows have been opened, rooms aired, flowers arranged, beds prepared, and food stocked. The summer house seems to awaken precisely when they arrive, but once again the awakening began days earlier through other people's work. Sea air enters the rooms. Clothing becomes lighter. Breakfast might be taken outdoors beneath an awning, while gulls sound beyond the lawn. The ocean provides a constant backdrop to conversations. Wealthy summer resorts offer extraordinary opportunities for recreation. But even after months of living among the richest families of the Gilded Age, there would still be small details capable of surprising you, because wealth revealed itself most clearly not in the grand ballroom, or beneath the largest chandelier, but in the countless ordinary inconveniences that wealthy people rarely had to face themselves. Imagine waking before sunrise during the coldest part of winter. Snow has fallen heavily during the night, covering the avenue outside and burying the gardens beneath a smooth white layer. In an ordinary household, such weather might immediately create problems. Someone needs to find fuel, clear a path, prepare breakfast, fetch water, and make certain the family can travel. Inside the mansion, however, most of those problems are already being solved before anyone upstairs becomes aware of them. A groundskeeper or outdoor worker begins clearing snow. Stable workers check the horses. Someone makes certain the entrance steps are safe. Coal is carried toward furnaces and fireplaces. Kitchen fires are strengthened. Water begins heating. Breakfast preparation starts. The family eventually awakens to discover winter transformed into scenery. They stand beside enormous windows admiring snow that other people have been working in for hours. This ability to experience difficult conditions mainly as atmosphere was one of wealth's quietest privileges. Rain became something pleasant to watch from a library. Cold weather became an excuse to sit beside a fireplace. Summer heat became a reason to leave the city for the coast. Mud was a problem for servants cleaning shoes and carriage wheels. Heavy luggage was a problem for porters. Long journeys were made comfortable through private compartments. Wealth did not change the weather or shorten physical distances, but it placed layers of labour between the family and discomfort. The morning begins as usual. A servant enters quietly, opens the curtains, tends the fire if necessary, and leaves fresh water. In another room, a maid helps prepare a wealthy woman for the day. Dressing is not merely about selecting something attractive. The clothing must correspond to the expected activities. A morning spent largely at home permits one kind of dress. Visiting requires another. Outdoor travel requires heavier fabrics and suitable footwear. Dinner demands formal clothing. A ball might require something entirely different. Wardrobes therefore become enormous, and maintaining them becomes a profession of its own. Fabrics must be brushed, stains treated, buttons replaced, lace repaired, gloves cleaned, shoes polished, hats stored properly, and seasonal clothing packed away when no longer needed. A lady's maid can spend hours maintaining garments that her employer wears for only a fraction of that time. Fashion changes quickly enough that expensive clothing may become outdated long before it wears out. This creates another curious feature of elite life. Objects can lose value socially while remaining perfectly functional physically. A gown made from expensive silk may be considered unsuitable, simply because its sleeves belong to last year's fashion. Some garments are altered rather than discarded, while others are passed along, stored, or given away. Dressmakers become important figures because they understand how rapidly taste is changing. Wealthy women may develop long relationships with particular designers, trusting them to ensure that they never appear noticeably behind fashion. The same anxiety eventually reaches men, though their formal clothing changes less dramatically. Tailors understand individual bodies, preferences, and social requirements. A well-dressed gentleman is expected to appear polished, without appearing obsessed with clothing. His coat should fit perfectly, but he should behave as though perfect tailoring required no thought whatsoever. Effortlessness is again the ideal. The rich are surrounded by enormous effort, devoted to creating the appearance that effort is unnecessary. Even breakfast reflects this principle. Food arrives neatly arranged rather than emerging from visible preparation. The family might discuss the day's plans while consuming ingredients gathered from an increasingly international food system. Coffee and tea connect the table to distant plantations and global trade. Sugar, spices, fruit, fish, meat, preserves and baked goods appear in combinations that would have represented extraordinary abundance to earlier generations. Improvements in transportation allow wealthy urban households to expect freshness with increasing confidence. Ice and refrigeration technologies expand storage possibilities. Private estates sometimes maintain ice houses filled during winter, so that cold storage remains available later in the year. Something as simple as chilled food during summer requires an infrastructure that family members may barely notice. After breakfast, perhaps the father does not travel to his office today, because severe weather has disrupted the city. Business follows him home instead. A secretary arrives carrying papers. Telegrams are delivered. The telephone rings occasionally. Several businessmen appear for a private meeting in the library. The doors close, and for the next 2 hours decisions involving enormous amounts of capital are made beside a fireplace, while snow continues falling outside. The domestic house becomes a temporary office because powerful men do not necessarily need to travel toward institutions. Institutions can come to them. Bankers, lawyers, architects, politicians, art dealers, doctors, tutors, dressmakers, and merchants all visit wealthy homes. The mansion becomes a centre toward which services flow. A person with sufficient money spends less time waiting in other people's spaces because other people are willing to enter his. Doctors make house calls. Tailors perform fittings privately. Teachers educate children at home. Merchants send goods for inspection. Musicians may perform in the drawing room. Even religious services could occasionally take place within private estates under special circumstances. Wealth brings the world inward for the women and children of the family. A snowy day creates an unusual period of confinement. Though confinement inside 40 rooms is relative, children may be delighted. Lessons continue during the morning, but afterwards they beg to go outside. Servants locate warm coats, boots, scarves, and gloves. A nurse or governess accompanies younger children, while older siblings rush into the snow. For a few hours, class distinctions seem almost less visible. A millionaire's child throws snowballs and becomes soaked just like any other child. He falls, laughs, and complains when told to return indoors. But the differences reappear immediately afterward. Wet clothing is removed and handed to someone else. A hot bath can be prepared. Fresh clothes appear. Hot drinks and food wait downstairs. The child experiences the adventure without much of the clean-up. Childhood privilege is often precisely this. Consequences are softened by an invisible network of adults. Yet parents do not necessarily want children to become completely helpless. Wealthy families frequently worry about overindulgence. A father who built his fortune through discipline may become irritated when a son treats servants disrespectfully or wastes money. Lectures about responsibility can occur inside rooms decorated at enormous expense. A child might be told to understand the value of money, while living in a house containing paintings worth more than many ordinary families will earn over decades. The contradiction is obvious to us, but parents genuinely struggle with it. How do you teach restraint when almost nothing is financially out of reach? Some establish strict allowances. Others require children to keep accounts. Sons may be expected to work during holidays or learn practical aspects of the family business. Daughters may be taught household budgeting, even though their future homes will likely employ staff. Parents sometimes deliberately refuse extravagant requests, not because they cannot afford them, but because they fear what constant satisfaction will do to character. Of course, children quickly learn that rules can sometimes be negotiated. A mother who refuses a new horse may eventually agree after weeks of persuasion. A father who considers an automobile unnecessary may change his mind after another wealthy family purchases one. Social competition undermines lessons about restraint. The child can always point towards someone richer. This produces a peculiar psychology among the elite. A family possessing almost everything can still feel comparatively modest. Someone always owns a larger yacht, a grander estate, a more important art collection, or a more fashionable address. Wealth is measured horizontally against peers rather than vertically against the entire population. The millionaire does not necessarily compare his dining room with a factory worker's kitchen. He compares it with another millionaire's dining room. This can produce endless dissatisfaction within astonishing abundance. Houses are remodeled only a few years after completion because tastes change. Entire rooms are redecorated. Furniture is replaced. New wings are added. Gardens are redesigned. A family might spend heavily making a house fashionable and then decide that another architectural style now feels more appropriate. Architects benefit enormously from this restlessness. They become celebrities among elite clients, traveling between cities and estates while designing increasingly ambitious residences. The relationship between architect and owner can become tense, because the mansion represents both artistic vision and personal identity. Owners demand changes, architects complain privately about bad taste. If you remained with one of these families long enough, you would eventually notice that the mansion itself seemed to possess a daily rhythm, almost like a living creature. It breathed with the movements of dozens of people whose lives rarely followed the same schedule. Before sunrise, the house belonged almost entirely to the servants. Corridors echoed with footsteps too soft to wake the family. Doors opened and closed with remarkable care. Fires were stirred back to life, ashes removed, fresh coal added, lamps extinguished after burning through the night, and windows briefly opened to exchange stale air for the cool freshness of morning. The smell of baking bread slowly drifted upward from the kitchen, mixing with the scent of polished wood, beeswax, soap, and smoke from the fireplaces. The great house felt less like an empty building and more like an enormous machine gradually warming itself before the people at its centre awoke. Then, almost imperceptibly, ownership of the house shifted. Bedroom doors opened upstairs, bells sounded softly from different floors. The first newspapers arrived, The family entered rooms that had already been prepared to receive them. By mid-morning, the mansion belonged to the household itself. Afternoon belonged to callers, deliveries, tutors, musicians, and visitors. Evening belonged to guests late at night. Once more, the servants quietly reclaimed the building, restoring every room before dawn returned. The cycle repeated day after day, season after season, until it became so familiar that almost nobody thought about it anymore. One of the most remarkable privileges enjoyed by wealthy families was the freedom to think about time differently from everyone else. For a factory worker, time belonged largely to the whistle, announcing the beginning and end of shifts. For a shopkeeper, time depended upon customers. For labourers, daylight determined how much work could be completed. Inside a great mansion, however, the family often shaped time around their own preferences. Breakfast could be delayed if someone slept late. Dinner might begin precisely when the hostess wished. A carriage departed when the family was ready, rather than according to a public timetable. If rain interrupted an afternoon ride, another activity simply replaced it. The family schedule became the organizing principle around which dozens of other schedules revolved. Servants adjusted their work, merchants adjusted deliveries, and visitors adjusted appointments. It was a subtle form of power, perhaps more easily overlooked than jewels or marble staircases, but no less significant. Wealth allowed people to expect the world to accommodate them. There were afternoons devoted entirely to reading, something many modern people might imagine becoming boring inside such an enormous house. Yet reading during the Gilded Age occupied a much larger place in daily life than it often does today. Without radio, television, or the internet, books remained one of the greatest forms of entertainment and education. A wealthy family's library might contain several thousand carefully chosen volumes arranged behind glass, fronted shelves, or dark wooden bookcases stretching almost to the ceiling. Histories, novels, travel accounts, poetry, philosophy, scientific works, biographies, atlases, and beautifully illustrated editions filled every available space. A gentleman might spend an entire rainy afternoon reading about ancient Rome, while seated beneath a portrait painted centuries earlier. His wife might be absorbed in a newly published novel from England. Their daughter practiced French by reading Victor Hugo in the original language, while their son disappeared into books about engineering or military history. Silence settled naturally over the room, interrupted only by the turning of pages and the occasional crackling of the fire. These quiet hours rarely appeared in newspaper society columns, yet they formed an important part of elite domestic life. Wealth created opportunities not only for entertainment, but also for intellectual curiosity. Music held a similar place. Nearly every prosperous household expected children, particularly daughters, to learn the piano, and many also studied violin, harp, or singing. Imagine entering the drawing room late in the afternoon just as sunlight filters through lace curtains. A young woman sits before a grand piano practicing Chopin or Beethoven, while her mother embroiders quietly nearby. Her younger brother sprawls across a sofa, pretending not to listen even though he recognizes every piece she plays. Somewhere farther down the corridor, their father pauses outside the library for a moment before continuing toward his study, smiling almost without realizing it. These small domestic performances often mattered more emotionally than the formal concerts attended in fashionable theatres. Music filled the house with familiarity. Certain melodies became associated with particular seasons or memories. Years later, someone hearing the same composition might instantly remember a long-forgotten afternoon beside the family piano. Pets occupied an unexpectedly important place as well. Dogs wandered through many wealthy homes with remarkable confidence. They slept beside fireplaces, greeted visitors at the entrance hall, accompanied children into the gardens, and occasionally ignored every rule of etiquette by appearing in formal rooms at inconvenient moments. Family letters frequently mention beloved dogs, almost as though they were additional children. Horses inspired even greater affection. A gentleman often knew every detail about his favorite riding horse, discussing its temperament with more enthusiasm than some business matters. Children developed deep attachments to ponies given as gifts. Stable workers understood these relationships and cared for the animals with extraordinary attention, because a sick horse could upset the entire household. Walking through the stables, you would discover that they were kept with almost the same cleanliness as parts of the house itself. Saddles gleamed from constant polishing, harnesses hung neatly along walls, and every horse occupied a carefully prepared stall. Before automobiles became common, these animals represented freedom, status, transportation, and companionship all at once. Health remained another constant concern despite enormous wealth. Doctors visited regularly, not only when someone became seriously ill, but also for routine advice. Medical theories changed rapidly during the late 19th century, and wealthy families eagerly embraced many new ideas while remaining suspicious of others. Fresh air was considered essential. Windows might be opened even during cold weather, because physicians recommended ventilation. Daily walks were encouraged. Certain foods were praised, while others were blamed for vague digestive complaints. Mineral waters from famous springs appeared on dining tables. Holidays to mountain resorts or seaside towns were often justified on medical grounds, as much as recreational ones. A persistent cough could result in months spent recovering in a different climate. Mothers worried constantly about children's health, especially during outbreaks of infectious disease. Although wealth reduced many dangers through cleaner surroundings and better nutrition, no family could completely escape epidemics. Newspapers regularly reported illnesses affecting prominent households, reminding everyone that disease respected neither fortune nor social standing. As the children matured, another invisible pressure gradually settled over the family. Every birthday quietly changed expectations. A son approaching adulthood was no longer simply a cheerful boy racing through the gardens. Relatives began discussing universities, careers, business partnerships, and eventually marriage. A daughter nearing 18 found herself entering a completely different world. Dressmakers visited more frequently. Dancing lessons became increasingly important. Invitations arrived addressed to her, rather than her parents alone. Older women watched her carefully, offering advice about conversation, posture, and etiquette. She discovered that society expected her to balance confidence with modesty, intelligence with grace, and independence with obedience. Every compliment carried hidden meaning. Every invitation suggested new possibilities. Every dance partner might become the subject of whispered speculation. It was flattering, exciting, exhausting, and sometimes deeply frustrating. Family portraits captured these transitions beautifully. Every few years, a photographer or painter arrived to preserve another stage of family life. Children who once sat impatiently on velvet chairs now stood proudly beside their parents. Hairstyles changed, fashions evolved, younger siblings grew taller, grandparents disappeared from later portraits, and eventually grandchildren appeared where children had once stood. The walls of the mansion gradually became a visual history of the family itself. Visitors walking through the corridors could almost watch generations passing before their eyes. A young boy pointing toward an old portrait might ask, "Who is that gentleman?" only to discover he was looking at his own grandfather as a young man. Such moments reminded everyone that even the richest families were only temporary guardians of their fortunes. Celebrations filled the calendar throughout the year. Birthdays were often marked with elegant dinners, flowers, gifts, and family gatherings. Anniversaries offered opportunities for speeches, recalling the early struggles of the parents. Before wealth transformed their circumstances, weddings represented the grandest celebrations of all. Imagine the mansion several days before a wedding. Florists arrive carrying thousands of blooms. Seamstresses work late into the evening, making final adjustments. Relatives occupy every guest room. And there were still countless parts of wealthy Gilded Age life that only became visible after the novelty of the mansion had faded, when you stopped staring at chandeliers and marble staircases and began noticing the tiny routines that shaped each day. Imagine waking one spring morning to the distant sound of rain against tall bedroom windows. It has been falling since some time before dawn, leaving the gardens outside dark, wet, and shining beneath a pale sky. Somewhere in the house, a clock strikes 7, but the family has little reason to hurry. The servants do. In the kitchen, breakfast preparations have already begun. Fires burn beneath heavy cooking ranges, while bread warms. Coffee is prepared, eggs are cooked, and dishes are arranged for service. A kitchen maid carries supplies from the pantry. Another worker climbs a narrow staircase carrying fresh linen. The housekeeper walks through several rooms inspecting the work completed during the early morning. She notices a vase that needs replacing, a curtain that has not been arranged correctly, and a small mark on a polished table that nobody in the family would probably have noticed. These details matter because the standard of the household is built from details. Upstairs, meanwhile, someone sleeps peacefully beneath expensive blankets while dozens of small decisions are being made on their behalf. This contrast repeats every morning. The wealthy family possesses the luxury of beginning the day slowly because the household begins it quickly for them. Eventually, bedroom doors open. A young gentleman steps into his dressing room and finds his clothing prepared. He may barely think about how many hands have touched the garments since he last wore them. A coat has been brushed, shoes have been polished, a shirt has been cleaned and pressed, a missing button has been replaced. Everything has returned to him in better condition than when he removed it. His sister experiences an even more complicated routine. Her maid helps arrange layers of clothing and then turns attention to her hair. Fashionable hairstyles can require considerable skill, particularly when preparing for formal occasions. Pins, brushes, combs, ribbons, and other accessories cover the dressing table. The young woman studies herself in the mirror while discussing the day ahead. Perhaps she is expected at lunch with relatives, followed by an afternoon charitable meeting, and then dinner at another family's mansion. 3 activities may require changes in clothing. Her maid already knows this and has begun preparing the later outfits before breakfast has even been served. Downstairs, the family gradually gathers. The father has already received several telegrams. One sits unopened beside his newspaper. He knows from experience that opening business correspondence too early can destroy a peaceful breakfast. So he ignores it temporarily and pours coffee instead. His wife is reading a letter from her sister. Their daughter discusses an upcoming dance. Their younger son complains that rain has ruined plans to ride. For several minutes, they resemble almost any comfortable family beginning an ordinary day. Then the father finally opens the telegram, and the atmosphere changes slightly. A railway investment requires attention. There has been an unexpected development several states away. He reads the message again, folds it, and asks a servant to inform his secretary that he will leave earlier than planned. Within moments, the machinery surrounding him adjusts. His carriage will be ready, papers will be gathered, appointments will shift. The family's enormous domestic system responds to one man's change of schedule almost instantly. Busyness could dominate the lives of wealthy fathers, even when their families enjoyed extraordinary leisure. The popular image of a millionaire sitting comfortably while money accumulated by itself rarely reflected the experience of those still actively building industrial empires. Competition was relentless. A rival could purchase an important company. A financial panic could reduce values overnight. New legislation could threaten an industry. Workers could strike. A railway could fail. A mine could flood, or an international event could disrupt markets. Information arrived through newspapers, telegrams, letters, and increasingly telephone calls. A businessman who controlled operations across several states might begin the morning discussing banking in New York, spend midday considering a factory in Pennsylvania, and finish the afternoon reading reports about investments thousands of miles away. His physical body occupied one office, but his financial interests stretched across an enormous landscape. The scale could create a peculiar distance between decisions and consequences. A businessman might approve the closure of an unprofitable operation while sitting beside a polished desk in a quiet office. On paper, the decision appears as columns of figures. Hundreds of miles away, families learn that wages they depend upon will disappear. The businessman may never see their faces. Industrial capitalism increasingly allowed ownership and labor to exist far apart. This distance made extraordinary fortunes possible. But it also intensified criticism of the wealthy newspapers, reformers, labor leaders, and politicians began asking whether individuals should possess so much economic power. Inside elite homes, these criticisms were sometimes dismissed as jealousy and sometimes discussed seriously. The children of wealthy families could develop views very different from those of their parents, particularly after university education exposed them to new political and economic ideas. Imagine the eldest son returning from university for a holiday and sitting opposite his father during dinner. The son has been reading about labor conditions and social reform. He asks why workers at one of the family's companies receive particular wages. His father puts down his fork. The question seems innocent, but everyone at the table senses where the conversation is going. The father explains costs, competition, investment, and risk. The son responds that workers face risks too. His mother attempts to redirect the conversation toward an upcoming trip. His younger sister watches with interest. A servant standing nearby continues pouring wine without changing expression. The disagreement may remain polite, but beneath it lies a generational conflict that appears in many wealthy households. The parents created or inherited a particular economic system. Their children, protected by the wealth it produced, sometimes possess enough security to criticize it. Daughters could experience similar awakenings through charitable work. A wealthy young woman might begin volunteering because society considers charity respectable, only to encounter conditions she had never imagined while growing up. Imagine her carriage entering a neighborhood where buildings stand crowded together and children play in streets very different from the landscaped avenues surrounding her home. She enters a small apartment occupied by an entire family. The room is clean but cramped. She notices how little furniture there is. She asks questions about work, food, schooling, and illness. Suddenly, abstract words such as poverty and labor acquire faces. She returns to the mansion that evening and notices its scale differently. Her bedroom alone may contain more space than the home she visited. A maid helps remove her coat while she remains unusually quiet. At dinner, she begins telling her parents what she saw. Perhaps they listen sympathetically. Perhaps her father points out that he already donates large sums to charity. Perhaps she insists that charity is not enough. These encounters could become the beginning of lifelong involvement in reform. Other daughters cared far less about politics and were completely absorbed by the social world available to them. Their lives could be genuinely enjoyable. Imagine being 20 years old with access to horses, travel, beautiful clothing, dances, concerts, private parties, country estates, and summers. Beside the sea, friends lived nearby or visited for weeks. There were letters to write, tennis matches to play, books to read, shopping trips to Paris, and endless possibilities for romance. Privilege could produce happiness just as easily as frustration. Not every wealthy young woman felt trapped, and not every wealthy young man felt burdened by inheritance. Many embraced their world enthusiastically. A summer day at a great estate could feel almost dreamlike. Morning sunlight enters through open windows while the countryside beyond remains quiet. Breakfast is served on a terrace overlooking lawns still wet with dew. The family eats slowly because there is nowhere urgent to be. Someone suggests riding before the temperature rises. Within minutes, word reaches the stable. Horses are prepared while family members change clothing. By the time they arrive, everything is waiting. They ride along private paths through woodland and open fields, accompanied perhaps by friends staying at the estate. The father, who appears severe inside his office, becomes relaxed outdoors. The children race ahead. Someone's hat nearly blows away. They stop beside a lake and allow the horses to drink. For an hour, the industrial world financing all of this feels impossibly distant. When they return, stable workers take the horses immediately. The riders simply walk away. Their boots are muddy, but someone will clean them. Baths are prepared, fresh clothing appears, lunch waits. This pattern repeats constantly. An experience ends precisely where the labor created by that experience begins. The family rides, someone cares for the horses afterward. The family eats, someone washes the dishes. The family changes clothes. Someone cleans what they removed. The family travels. Someone handles luggage. There were also those quiet hours between afternoon and evening when a wealthy Gilded Age household seemed to hover between two different versions of itself. The formal calls of the afternoon were ending, but dinner had not yet begun. Carriages that had spent the day moving through crowded streets returned one after another to the stable entrance. Horses were unharnessed, rubbed down, watered, and fed while coachmen discussed the next day's requirements. Inside the mansion, calling cards collected during the afternoon were carried to the mistress of the house. Flowers delivered earlier were inspected and rearranged. Servants moved through the drawing rooms, restoring chairs that visitors had shifted slightly from their proper positions. Curtains were adjusted against the fading light. Fires were strengthened as evening approached. Lamps were prepared, or in the newest houses electric lights began glowing with the effortless brightness that still seemed wonderfully modern. Upstairs, wardrobes opened, and the household began another transformation. The comfortable clothing of the afternoon disappeared and formal evening dress emerged. For the family, changing for dinner might feel like an ordinary habit for the servants responsible for clothing. It represented another carefully timed stage of the working day. A gentleman's evening clothes had already been brushed and laid out. His shoes reflected the light, fresh linen waited beside the dressing table. His valet knew whether he was dining at home, attending the opera, or travelling to another mansion, because each possibility required slightly different preparation. Across the corridor, a woman's dressing room could become a scene of far greater activity. An evening gown might require assistance simply to put on correctly. Hair had to be arranged, jewellery selected, gloves located, and small imperfections corrected before anyone downstairs saw her. She might sit before a large mirror while her maid works behind her, watching the transformation gradually occur. During these moments, the relationship between mistress and maid could become unusually personal. Hours spent together in dressing rooms encouraged conversation. A maid might know more about her employer's worries than many relatives did. She heard complaints about uncomfortable gowns, difficult guests, troublesome children, disappointing husbands, and social rivals. She might be trusted with letters or jewellery, yet once the bedroom door opened, intimacy disappeared behind formal roles. The mistress descended the grand staircase as though she had prepared herself entirely alone, while the maid remained upstairs dealing with everything left behind. Downstairs, the dinner table waited with almost mathematical precision. Silverware stood in carefully measured positions. Crystal glasses reflected the growing light from chandeliers. Napkins had been folded according to household preference. Place cards indicated where guests would sit. Flowers decorated the centre without being so tall that conversation became difficult. The butler inspected everything because one misplaced object could reflect poorly on the household. Great houses competed through perfection, and perfection was achieved through repetition. A servant who had set the same dining table hundreds of times could detect immediately when something was slightly wrong. Perhaps tonight there were no outside guests at all. Even wealthy families sometimes ate relatively private dinners. Although private did not necessarily mean casual by modern standards. Parents and older children gathered around a table large enough for far more people than were present. Servants remained nearby. Courses arrived one after another. Conversation could become more personal than it would during a formal dinner. The father might ask, the mother might mention that a relative was coming to stay. A daughter might announce that she wanted to attend a lecture her parents considered unsuitable. Someone complains about a neighbour, Someone else laughs. A dog waits hopefully beneath the table, despite repeated efforts to keep it away. The enormous dining room briefly becomes what dining rooms everywhere become. A place where family members exchange the details of their lives. Yet even the most ordinary conversation is surrounded by signs of extraordinary resources. The plates may have been imported from Europe. The silver bears a family monogram. The paintings on the walls might be centuries old. The wine has travelled across the Atlantic. Several servants stand ready to ensure nobody needs to leave the table for anything. After dinner, family members separate according to preference. The father might enter the library where newspapers and correspondence wait. His wife could settle in a smaller drawing room with her daughters. The son might disappear into a billiard room with a visiting cousin. Younger children are already upstairs. These evening rooms reveal something important about wealthy domestic architecture. The grandest spaces impressed strangers, but the family often preferred smaller rooms when alone. A huge ballroom felt ridiculous with 4 people inside it. A smaller library or sitting room provided warmth and intimacy. Chairs were softer. Personal photographs appeared on tables. Books lay open instead of being arranged purely for display. Dogs were more welcome. These were the rooms where people truly relaxed. In a private sitting room, a wealthy woman might finally remove her gloves, lean back in a favourite chair, and spend an hour doing almost nothing. Perhaps she reads a novel. Perhaps she writes letters. Perhaps her daughter sits nearby, embroidering while another practices music. The conversation wanders between family gossip and tomorrow's plans. Nobody is trying to impress anyone. The servants enter only when required. Such evenings could be deeply peaceful, and wealth made peace easier to arrange. The house protected the family from street noise, cold, overcrowding, and many domestic burdens. There was space to be alone without being isolated completely. A person tired of conversation could simply move. If the father wanted silence, he closed the library door. If his daughter wanted company, she joined her mother. Space allowed moods to coexist. But the same space could become uncomfortable when relationships were strained. Imagine a husband and wife who had gradually grown distant after 20 years of marriage. In a small house, they would still encounter one another constantly. In a mansion, they could organize entire days around avoidance. He breakfasted early. She remained upstairs. He spent afternoons at his club. She made social calls. At dinner, they were perfectly polite. Guests saw an impressive couple managing an impressive household. Afterward, he entered the library while she went to her sitting room. Weeks could pass without a serious private conversation. Wealth made separation possible without requiring actual separation. Society might never realize anything was wrong. Appearances mattered too much. Divorce existed, but among elite families, it could produce scandal, financial complications, and endless newspaper attention. Many couples therefore maintained arrangements that preserved public respectability while allowing considerable private independence. Others remained genuinely devoted throughout their lives. Wealth did not determine the quality of a marriage. It simply changed the circumstances in which the marriage operated. A loving couple could use their freedom to travel together, support shared interests, and spend more time with children. An unhappy couple could use the same freedom to live almost separate lives beneath one roof. Children noticed more than adults imagined. A daughter could understand perfectly when her parents were being unusually formal with one another. A son knew when his father had been away from home too long. The presence of servants did not prevent family tension. It simply required tension to be expressed differently. Arguments might occur behind closed doors rather than across the dinner table. Letters sometimes replaced conversations when emotions were difficult to express directly. A husband travelling on business could receive a surprisingly frank letter from his wife, because writing allowed her to say what social habits discouraged her from saying face to face. These letters, when they survive, reveal people far more vulnerable than their public portraits suggest. The stern industrialist photographed beside a massive desk might write tenderly to his wife about missing his children. A woman remembered primarily for extravagant parties might write anxiously about an ill daughter. Public images flatten people. Private correspondence restores complexity. The same was true of diaries. A young woman could return from a spectacular ball and record that she had been bored. Another might write several pages about dancing twice with one particular man while barely mentioning the hundreds of other guests. A wealthy son could complain about his father's expectations, despite possessing every material advantage. Diaries remind us that people experience events according to emotion rather than historical importance. A ball costing an extraordinary amount could matter less to a young woman than a 10-minute conversation on a staircase. The staircase itself might become permanently associated with that memory. Years later, she could pass the same place and remember exactly where he stood. Mansions accumulated these invisible personal geographies. One corridor remembered an argument, one terrace remembered a proposal, one bedroom remembered an illness, one window remembered waiting for someone to return. Outsiders saw architecture, families saw events, servants possessed their own map of memories. The kitchen table might be where a maid first learned that her sister had become engaged.